I was fighting leukemia when my stepmother secretly erased me from my dad's $60 million will. She bet on my death, but I survived and uncovered her twisted plan to steal everything. I was 29, battling leukemia, when my stepmother convinced my father to rewrite his will behind my back. She thought I wouldn't survive to see what she'd done. But I did survive, and what I discovered about her plans, and her past, changed everything. I'm sitting here in my newly renovated loft, looking out at the city skyline, and I still can't believe how much my life has changed in the past 2 years. I'm a 31-year-old woman now, healthy and thriving, but there was a time when I wasn't sure I'd make it to see this view. I need to share this story because it's been eating at me, and maybe writing it all out will help me finally process what happened. My father, Richard, was a successful commercial real estate developer who built his empire from nothing. My mother passed away from breast cancer when I was 16, and it was just Dad and me for nearly 8 years after that. We were incredibly close. He taught me everything about his business, and I worked alongside him through college and beyond. We had this unspoken understanding that someday I'd take over the company he'd spent decades building. Then he met Simone at a charity gala when I was 24. She was 42 to his 61, a former event coordinator with impeccable taste and a practiced elegance that seemed to captivate everyone she met. She had this way of making you feel like the most important person in the room, at least at first. They married within 8 months, which felt rushed to me, but Dad seemed genuinely happy for the first time since Mom died. I tried to be supportive, despite the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. Simone and I maintained a cordial relationship initially. She never tried to play stepmom, which I appreciated, and she seemed content managing the social aspects of Dad's life, hosting parties, organizing fundraisers, cultivating connections. Dad's health had never been robust. He'd had a heart attack in his 50s, and Simone positioned herself as his caretaker and companion. I was busy with my own life, working 60-hour weeks at the development firm, so I didn't notice the subtle shifts happening. About 18 months into their marriage, I started feeling exhausted all the time. I chalked it up to work stress, but when I began bruising easily and running low-grade fevers, I finally saw a doctor. The diagnosis came like a thunderbolt: acute lymphoblastic leukemia. I was 29 years old, and suddenly my entire world narrowed to treatment schedules, blood counts, and survival statistics. Dad was devastated. He immediately took a step back from the business to support me through chemotherapy. Simone, to her credit, seemed supportive too. She'd visit the hospital, bring flowers, post encouraging messages on social media about our brave family journey. But I started noticing odd things. She'd steer Dad away from conversations about the business succession plans. When I tried to discuss work matters with Dad during my better days, she'd interrupt with concerns about me overexerting myself. My best friend since childhood, Larry, was the one who first voiced what I'd been trying to ignore. He worked as a paralegal at a corporate law firm, and he'd always been perceptive about people's motivations. During one of his hospital visits, after Simone had just left, he said quietly, "Be careful with her. I've seen this pattern before. People who position themselves as indispensable when someone's vulnerable." I was too sick and too focused on surviving to think much about it then. The chemotherapy was brutal. I lost my hair, my appetite, my energy. There were days I wasn't sure I'd make it through. Dad would sit by my bedside for hours, holding my hand, telling me stories about Mom, about building his first property, about the future we'd have together when I beat this thing. Those moments kept me going. What I didn't know was that during my sickest weeks, when I was barely conscious from the treatment, Simone had been working on Dad. She'd apparently been suggesting that the stress of worrying about business succession was affecting his heart condition. She convinced him to meet with his attorney to update some paperwork and simplify things during this difficult time. Dad, exhausted and terrified of losing me, agreed. I found out about the will change completely by accident. It was about 8 months into my treatment, during a brief remission period when I was feeling stronger. I'd stopped by Dad's home office to grab some files he'd asked for, and I saw a document partially visible under some other papers on his desk. The letterhead was from his estate attorney. I wouldn't have looked, except I saw my name. My hands shook as I read the summary page. Dad had revised his will 3 months earlier. The company, worth somewhere between $40 and $60 million, was now set to be placed in a trust controlled by Simone, with her as the primary beneficiary. I would receive a modest annual stipend of $50,000 and the family lake house. Everything else, including the primary residence, investment portfolios, and most critically, the business my mother's life insurance had helped fund and that I'd worked in for years, would be Simone's. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The document was dated during the worst week of my chemotherapy, when I'd been hospitalized with complications and wasn't even fully coherent. I took photos of everything with shaking hands and left before anyone came home. Larry met me at a coffee shop near the hospital. When I showed him the photos, his face went pale. "This is elder manipulation," he said immediately. "She waited until you were incapacitated and he was at his most vulnerable. This is exactly what I was worried about." He convinced me not to confront Dad immediately. "You're still in treatment. You need to be strategic about this. Let me do some digging first." What Larry uncovered over the next few weeks was chilling. Simone had been married twice before, both times to wealthy older men. The first marriage ended in a quiet divorce with a substantial settlement after only 3 years. The second husband died of a heart attack 2 years into their marriage, leaving her everything. His adult children had threatened to contest the will but ultimately settled out of court. There were rumors of financial manipulation, but nothing was ever proven. Larry also discovered that Simone had been meeting regularly with Dad's attorney, far more often than normal estate planning would require. She'd become signatory on several of Dad's accounts and had quietly been moving assets around. Most alarmingly, she'd taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Dad just 6 months after their wedding, with herself as the sole beneficiary. I was furious, terrified, and still fighting cancer. The stress was affecting my treatment, but I knew I couldn't ignore this. I needed to talk to Dad, but I had to time it right. I decided to wait until after my next round of treatment, when I'd hopefully be stronger. But Simone moved faster than I expected. 2 weeks later, during a family dinner at their house, one of the few I'd been well enough to attend, she brought up the future of the company. "Richard and I have been discussing how to handle the business transition," she said smoothly, dabbing her lips with a napkin. "Given the circumstances, we think it's best if we bring in a professional management team and eventually sell. The stress of ownership isn't good for your father's heart, and obviously, you have your health to focus on." I stared at her, then at Dad. He looked uncomfortable but nodded. "We haven't made any final decisions, sweetheart, but Simone makes good points. The most important thing is you getting better." "Selling Dad's company?" I kept my voice steady. "The company you've built over 30 years? That I've worked in since I was 22? Without even discussing it with me first." Simone's smile didn't waver. "Darling, you're in no condition to take on that kind of responsibility. We're thinking of your well-being." That's when something inside me snapped. "Is that why you had Dad rewrite his will while I was barely conscious in the hospital? For my well-being?" The silence was deafening. Dad's face went white. Simone's composure cracked for just a second before she recovered. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said coolly. I pulled out my phone and showed Dad the photos I'd taken. "I found the revised will in your office. Dated March 18. That was the week I was hospitalized with that infection, remember? The week I almost died." Dad took the phone with trembling hands. As he scrolled through the images, I watched his face transform from confusion to shock to something that looked like betrayal. "Simone," he said quietly, "what is this?" She tried to backpedal. "Richard, we discussed this. You were so worried about the burden on her, about making things simpler." The attorney said. "I don't remember agreeing to any of this," Dad interrupted, his voice hardening. "I certainly don't remember cutting my daughter out of the business. I'm not cutting her out. There's a trust, a stipend, $50,000 a year. I cut in. For a company worth tens of millions? A company my mother's life insurance helped save during the 2008 crash? A company I've dedicated 7 years of my life to." The dinner ended badly. Dad asked Simone to leave the room so we could talk privately. I told him everything Larry had discovered, her history, the life insurance policy, the suspicious account movements. I watched my father age 10 years in that conversation. "I've been such a fool," he said finally, his voice breaking. "I was lonely after your mother died, and scared when you got sick. She made me feel less alone. But you're right. I can see it now. How did I not see it before?" We decided not to confront Simone immediately. Dad wanted to protect his assets first, and Larry connected us with an attorney who specialized in estate planning and elder law. Over the next month, while I continued my treatment, Dad quietly worked with his legal team to understand the full extent of what Simone had been doing. The picture that emerged was worse than we'd imagined. She'd been systematically isolating Dad from his longtime friends and business associates, controlling his social calendar, monitoring his communications. She'd convinced him to remove his brother, my uncle, as co-trustee of certain accounts, replacing him with her own financial advisor. She'd even tried to get Dad to sign papers that would have given her power of attorney, though thankfully he'd balked at that. Meanwhile, Simone could tell something had shifted. She became alternately clingy and defensive. She'd show up at my chemotherapy sessions uninvited, making public displays of stepmotherly concern while shooting me cold looks when Dad wasn't watching. She ramped up her social media presence, painting herself as the devoted wife caring for her sick stepdaughter and aging husband. The comments from her followers praising her strength and dedication were nauseating. My treatment was entering a critical phase. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but I needed a bone marrow transplant to have the best chance at long-term survival. Dad was tested but wasn't a match. We'd started searching the registry for donors when Uncle James, Dad's younger brother, turned out to be a perfect match. Uncle James had always been protective of me. When Dad told him everything that had been happening with Simone, he was livid. "I knew there was something off about her," he said. "She tried to cut me out of your life, Richard. I just thought you were busy." The transplant was scheduled for late autumn. It was a risky procedure, but it was my best shot. Dad was a wreck, and despite everything, I could see the toll this was taking on him. The betrayal, the guilt, the fear of losing me, it was crushing him. 2 weeks before my scheduled transplant, Simone made her final, desperate play. She must have sensed that her control was slipping. Dad had been pulling back from her, spending more time with me and Uncle James, asking pointed questions about their finances. So she staged a medical emergency. I got a frantic call from Dad saying Simone had collapsed at home and was being rushed to the hospital. When we got there, she was conscious but claiming severe chest pains. The doctors ran tests but couldn't find anything definitively wrong. She milked it for all it was worth, playing the fragile victim, suggesting stress from family tensions was affecting her health. But Dad wasn't buying it anymore. And neither were the doctors, apparently. One of the ER physicians, a woman Dad knew from his charity work, pulled him aside. "Mr. Richardson, I'm not seeing any cardiac indicators. These symptoms are inconsistent. Has your wife been under unusual stress?" That's when Dad told her everything. The physician recommended a psychiatric evaluation, which Simone refused. She checked herself out of the hospital against medical advice and went home. The cracks were showing. My transplant came at the most chaotic time possible. Uncle James was by my side, Dad was there despite his own health concerns, and Simone was conspicuously absent, claiming she was too unwell to visit the hospital. Larry joked grimly that at least I wouldn't have to deal with her fake concern during my recovery. The transplant was rough. There were complications, infections, days where I wasn't sure I'd pull through. But I did. Slowly, gradually, my body accepted the new marrow. My blood counts started improving. The doctors started using words like remission and recovery. While I was in the hospital fighting for my life, Dad was finally taking decisive action. He worked with his attorneys to file for an annulment based on fraud, arguing that Simone had misrepresented herself and her intentions from the beginning. When that proved too complicated, he filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting a full forensic audit of their finances. Simone fought back hard. She hired an aggressive attorney and claimed she was entitled to half of everything, including the business. She submitted evidence of her contributions to Dad's life and company, social events she'd hosted, connections she'd facilitated. She painted herself as the devoted wife who'd sacrificed her own career to support her husband and his sick daughter. But Dad's legal team was better. The forensic accountant uncovered a pattern of unauthorized transfers. Simone had been siphoning money into accounts Dad didn't know existed. Small amounts at first, then larger sums. She'd been planning her exit strategy, building her own nest egg from Dad's assets. They also found communications between Simone and her financial advisor discussing timeline adjustments based on my prognosis. The implications were horrifying. Larry, who'd been helping coordinate information between Dad's attorneys and his own firm, showed me some of the messages. One email from Simone to her advisor, dated during my worst treatment period, said, "The situation may resolve itself naturally within 6 to 12 months. Maintain current strategy." I threw up when I read that. She'd been banking on me dying. The discovery process also revealed that Simone had been in contact with a buyer interested in Dad's company. She'd been negotiating a potential sale without Dad's knowledge or consent, promising that she'd have full control of the business within the year. The timeline was chilling. As all this was unfolding, I was slowly recovering. My hair started growing back. My strength returned in increments. I was able to move back into my own apartment with the help of a visiting nurse. Dad visited constantly, and we began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship. He was profoundly apologetic, almost broken by guilt. "I let her manipulate me," he said one evening, sitting in my living room. "I let her come between us. I almost let her take everything from you while you were fighting for your life. I'm so sorry, sweetheart." The divorce proceedings dragged on for months. Simone refused to settle, convinced she could outlast Dad in court. She underestimated how much evidence there was against her, and how much Dad was willing to spend to make sure she got nothing. The turning point came when Dad's attorneys deposed one of Simone's friends from her previous marriage. Under oath, the friend reluctantly testified that Simone had bragged about her strategy for marrying wealthy older men with adult children. She said kids are always too busy with their own lives to notice what's happening until it's too late, the friend testified. She said the key was to strike when they were vulnerable. Sick kids, health scares, anything that made them dependent on her. The testimony was damning. Combined with the financial evidence and those horrifying emails about my prognosis, Simone's case collapsed. She eventually settled for a fraction of what she'd been demanding. Enough to go away quietly, but nowhere near the fortune she'd been planning to steal. The day the divorce was finalized, Dad and I went to his attorney's office together. He'd already had his will revised again, properly this time, with Uncle James and his longtime business attorney serving as co-executors to prevent any future manipulation. I was restored as the primary beneficiary and designated successor to the company. "I should have protected you better," Dad said as we left the attorney's office. "I should have seen through her. You were lonely," I told him. "And she was good at what she did. We both learned from this." My recovery continued. I hit the 1-year post-transplant mark, then 2 years. My cancer remained in remission. I slowly returned to work at the company, initially part-time, then gradually taking on more responsibility as my strength returned. Dad started teaching me the aspects of the business he'd always handled personally, preparing me for the eventual transition he'd originally planned. Simone disappeared from our lives. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved to Arizona and was dating another older man, this time a retired pharmaceutical executive. I felt a brief impulse to warn him, but Larry talked me out of it. "Some people have to learn their own lessons," he said. "Your responsibility is to your own healing now." The experience changed me profoundly. I became much more cautious about people's motivations, more protective of both Dad and the business. I also became an advocate for other young adults dealing with serious illness, speaking at cancer support groups about the importance of protecting yourself legally even while you're fighting for your health. Uncle James, who'd literally saved my life with his bone marrow donation, became even more important to our family. He joined the company's board of directors and became one of my most trusted advisors. Dad's relationship with his brother strengthened in a way it hadn't been since they were young. As for Dad, he threw himself into both the business and his health. He started exercising, eating better, attending therapy to process his guilt and the betrayal. He dated occasionally but was understandably cautious. "Once burned, twice shy," he joked, though I could see the pain behind it. I eventually met someone, a doctor who'd been part of my care team at the hospital, though we didn't start dating until well after I was discharged and no longer his patient. He understood what I'd been through in a way most people couldn't. We took things slowly, building trust carefully. Dad approved, especially after running what I jokingly called his post-Simone background check. The company thrived under the renewed partnership between Dad and me. We expanded into sustainable development projects, something I'd been passionate about. Dad gradually stepped back from day-to-day operations, transitioning into more of an advisory role while I took over as CEO. It was the succession we'd always planned, just delayed by cancer and betrayal. Looking back now, 3 years after my diagnosis and 2 years after the divorce was finalized, I can see how close I came to losing everything. If I hadn't accidentally found that will, if Larry hadn't been perceptive enough to investigate, if the doctors hadn't been able to get me into remission, Simone would have gotten exactly what she wanted. But I survived. And in surviving, I learned that family isn't always the people you're born with or the people who marry into your life. Family is the people who stand by you when you're at your weakest. Larry, Uncle James, the extended network of friends and colleagues who supported me through treatment. Family is my dad, finally seeing clearly and fighting to make things right. I also learned that being sick doesn't mean being powerless. Even at my weakest, I had agency. I had the right to know what was being done with my family's legacy. I had the right to fight back, even when fighting cancer was already taking everything I had. Simone taught me an important lesson, though not the one she intended. She taught me that trust has to be earned continuously, that vigilance isn't the same as cynicism, and that protecting yourself and your legacy isn't selfish, it's necessary. I'm healthy now. The company is thriving. Dad and I have rebuilt our relationship into something even stronger than before. I've learned to set boundaries, to ask hard questions, to verify rather than simply trust. And when I look at that city view from my loft, the one I wasn't sure I'd live to see, I'm grateful for every hard lesson that got me here. Including the one Simone inadvertently taught me about survival, strength, and the importance of fighting for what's rightfully yours. Some people might say I should feel bitter or angry about what happened. But mostly I feel relieved. Relieved that I survived the cancer. Relieved that we caught Simone's scheme before it was too late. Relieved that Dad woke up in time. Relieved that I have a future to build, a company to grow, and people around me who genuinely care about my well-being rather than my inheritance. Simone tried to erase me from my father's will while betting on my death. Instead, I erased her from our lives while fighting for my survival. And I won.